Well, good morning and welcome to Elevenses. I'm Kevin Williams and this is my show. It's a beautiful sunny day here in London. It's quite warm already and it's due to hit a temperature of somewhere around about 30 degrees, possibly later on today. So what have we got for you on today's Elevenses show? Well, we'll be looking at the end for petrol-driven motorcycles, or at least polluting petrol-driven motorcycles, which is due now in 2035 or earlier. We'll have a look at that in some detail. Up in the Scotland on Shetland, there is a problem for trainers up there after the DVSA have moved their Module 1 test centre. And we'll be having a quick look at a motorcycle from a Chinese manufacturer called Benda, and that will be a petrol-driven one. And we'll finish off with an item on keeping your cool. Basically, how to make the most of a UK heatwave and keep riding. Right, so settle yourselves down and you can join me here Wednesdays and Sundays at 11 for this particular show. So basically, just a reminder first off that I will be giving the Science of Being Seen talk again. That's due to go out on Wednesday, the 4th of August at 8 p.m. and you can sign up for tickets here. I'm just putting the link up now. There is a small charge of £5 to help cover the costs of researching the project and to keep it updated. And the other thing I will say is don't forget I am offering evening training, so it's a great way to take advantage of these longer daylight hours and the warm evenings. Kevin, good morning to you. Good to see you. Well, it's finally happened. On Wednesday, the government transport decarbonisation plan was announced. It's a 220-page document, and after several years when the government's plans to ban the sales of polluting petrol-driven motorcycles wasn't entirely clear, an end date has now been set, 2035, and it could be earlier if a faster transition is seen as feasible. Now, you'll probably recall that the sales of new petrol and diesel-driven cars will end in 2030, which was actually brought forward last year in the middle of the pandemic, and that's 5 years earlier than the date previously announced in 2020, and it's actually 10 years earlier than the original deadline, which I think dates back to about 2018. So it wasn't actually hard to predict that motorcycles were in the government's crosshairs, despite the DFT, Department for Transport, saying in February last year that motorcycles were outside the scope of the initial consultation. Back in 2018, the government recognised that the market for zero-emission motorcycles is at an earlier stage than either cars or vans. In other words, what they were saying was that the development of electric cars was well advanced, but that for motorcycles, the progress was rather lagging behind. But at the same time, the statement said that whilst cars outnumber motorcycles by more than 24 to 1 on UK roads, motorcycles are a sizable vehicle population. And when it was also said that zero-emission motorcycles would help reduce congestion, improve air quality, and reduce noise, the writing was definitely on the wall. Now, at this point, it's important to say that the ban is actually on tailpipe emissions. So, in theory, as well as electric motorcycles, we could see the development of fuel cell bikes, but frankly, the development of those does seem to be even further behind than electric vehicles. You may recall that Suzuki actually trialled some zero-emission hydrogen-powered Bergman scooters with the Met Police in 2017, and they ran them for 18 months. Although I've no idea how they performed, what the feedback that Suzuki got, or where that research is actually going longer term. I simply don't know. There's also the possibility that the avenue of synthetic fuels will be pursued, although quite how that will fit with zero tailpipe emissions, I'm not quite sure. You can certainly create a carbon neutral fuel, but burning it creates NOx pollutants, and whilst catalyzers are efficient, they're up to about 90% efficient, they are not 100% efficient, so they can't completely clean up what comes out the exhaust. So it's fair to say, at least for the immediate future, I think that it's electric motorcycles we're looking at, so that's what I'm going to talk about at the moment. Now, the MCIA, the Motorcycle Industry Association, which is the body representing motorcycle manufacturers and other allied industries in the UK, they claim that they are behind the shift, and that they say this landmark announcement comes off the back of 3 years intensive MCIA engagement with government ministers and officials. They're also positioning themselves to jointly lead the conception and delivery of an action plan along with Zemo Partnership. Now, who else Zemo Partnership, you probably wonder. I certainly was. Turns out that they are a not-for-profit independent partnership, and their aim is to change the way people think about mobility and to steer them towards the future of zero emissions. So just where do they get their cash? Well, actually, they're jointly funded by government and, in brackets, our members. Now, it's a position which always makes me wonder just how independent an organisation can be, because what generally happens is if your independent organisation, which is funded by a particular body, upsets that particular body, what usually happens next is the funding is withdrawn. So independent, I think we can be fairly sure that they'll be fairly careful just how independent they are. Anyway, the MCIA believe that motorcycle industry is now positioned as part of the solution to many of the government's public policy challenges. Quoted elsewhere, the MCIA's chief executive says he believes that the change is actually an opportunity to attract more people into motorcycling, something that the MCIA have been saying for some considerable time. So he says, I'm as big a petrol head as anyone, but one of the industry's biggest failings is we've struggled to attract new people into our market. Well, again, that's something that I've talked about on this show numerous times. It's not helped by aiming expensive motorcycles at the ever declining chunk of the population which has a large amount of disposable income. I've aimed my criticism at Ducati, for example, who've converted what was an inexpensive motorcycle, the Monster, into a premium price product, which quite frankly is out of the price range of many new riders. The CEO of MCIA goes on to say, the short-term opportunity is in the small capacity up to 11 kilowatts. The market growth is absolutely vertical at the moment. Well, it certainly grew out vertical for small electric scooters. The entire segment, 11 kilowatts, is the up to 14.6 horsepower. So basically, it's what you can ride on an L plate. The growth in that segment has been significant over the last year or so, fueled partly, of course, by the pandemic and the fact that people don't want to ride around on public transport at the moment. So the yes, certainly people have taken on electric motorcycles in that category, and so yes, the compared with last year, there are many more sales, but the vast majority of sales, it's absolutely true to say, are still conventional petrol engine motorcycles. But it doesn't mean that electric motorcycles aren't starting to make inroads. Interestingly, he also believes that there's a market for e-step scooters, and he says they're just like a modern version of the likes of a C50 I would have ridden. Well, I can't honestly say that an e-step scooter is anything like a C50. There's just no comparison there at all. And the idea that these are going to become mainstream vehicles that anybody can use on the roads is certainly a controversial one. I've also talked about this. I also think the genie is out of the bottle on that one. I don't think people will stop using these e-scooters. I think they will continue to buy them and use them illegally, and I think eventually they'll have to be legalized, probably when the trials prove they're not quite as dangerous as people think. But turning back to the motorcycle market, powered two-wheelers, there are a number of manufacturers right now, Zero, Energica, Suron, NIU. They're already selling electric street motorbikes and scooters. Now, what are the Japanese up to? What are the Europeans up to? Well, they're probably, that we know they are working on electric bikes, but there's not been a lot of progress so far. I did show you a Kawasaki, which was built around an existing frame and bodywork, a small electric motor with a 4-speed gearbox, which was interesting because most electric bikes don't have gearboxes. The only ones that have been the ones designed for racing at the TT. Zeros, for example, are no gearbox. But I suspect they've been waiting for a marker like the one we've just seen to be laid down. There's not much point in actively developing for a market which isn't yet existing. But I do think they have to be careful, because if they don't get a move on, the Chinese will get there first. Those manufacturers I've mentioned, 2 of them are Chinese. Now, there are still plenty of claims out there that electric bikes are expensive to buy, but the gap is narrowing all the time. Have a look at this particular little scooter. Let me just get the picture up on screen. There we go. That's not the right one. Hang on a minute. Let's come back to that one. There it is. That is the Super Socco CU Mini. It's a moped equivalent electric scooter. It has a little rechargeable battery pack, which gives you a maximum of 43 miles range. It has a top speed of 30 miles an hour, and it will set you back under 1,700 quid. So it's hardly breaking the bank. The other factor that to bear in mind is, for the more expensive motorcycles, you still have the plug-in grant, up to 20% of the price, to a maximum of £1,500 for the bigger bikes. And that closes the gap on the bigger machines as well. I mentioned last time out the Zero FXE, new Zero motorcycle. Once you apply that grant, it comes down in price to £8,500 or thereabouts. And that compares pretty favourably with Honda's DCT NC series bikes. It's cheaper than the scooter, the adventure scooter, based on that engine. But there were hints back in 2018 that there are limits to that funding. The statement also said at the time, to continue to support the development of the market and bridge the cost gap that remains between zero emission and petrol motorcycles, we will continue the plug-in grant until at least 2020. So we're obviously already past that date. So the implication is there will be a cut-off point at some point. Now, not everybody's happy, of course, to see electric motorcycles as the future, and that probably includes a lot of existing motorcyclists, certainly includes a lot of enthusiastic ones. And for the time being, we're still going to be seeing claims that existing petrol motorcycles and scooters produce fewer emissions than a car, and they're already a green alternative. But, the fact is that it's not true. Motorcycles have lagged behind cars in terms of emission standards. So many of the bikes that are actually out there on the road are quite heavily polluting compared with a car. If you compare the emissions from a 1000cc motorcycle and a 1000cc car, the car will win hands down, except for the very, very latest motorcycle models. And the other thing is that a mid-sized hybrid can easily beat the fuel consumption of a mid-sized motorcycle. People struggle to believe this, but my XJ6 couldn't match the fuel consumption of an Audi Q3 that I drove in California for the best part of 1,000 miles. And that includes taking the Los Angeles traffic into account. The bike simply wouldn't have managed the fuel consumption the car did. And of course, you can get 4 people in that car, as well as a lot of luggage. 2 people and a bit of luggage is all the bike can manage. So the green claims are distinctly tarnished. The biggest anxiety for riders, and this is something that I wrote about in the comments the other day, it's range anxiety. Now, for commuters, it really isn't likely to be an issue, and that's what Tony Campbell, the chief exec of the MCIA, was talking about. Visor Down, for example, polled their readers some years back, and they found that the average commute by motorcycle was 15 miles each way. And that's actually well within the range of all but the cheapest electric bikes. Now, we just mentioned that little scooter, which can actually do just over 40 miles. Probably it comes down if you actually ride it flat out at 30 miles an hour everywhere, but hey ho, it can do it. And you can also, of course, recharge these things from a standard plug, and they also have removable batteries, which means you can basically take the battery out, lug it up to the office and plug it into a standard socket ready to go home. So you don't need huge batteries on a short range commuter. So what about a more conventional recreational rider? Well, 100-mile plus ranges are not uncommon now on these bikes, even at speed. The bigger Zeros, for example, they have a lot of performance, and if you use it all, it will bring the distance you can go between top-ups down, but you can get 100 miles or so out of these bikes. It's right on the cusp of being usable for my training. Typically I probably do something around about 100 miles on a training session. By the time I've got to the training course, run the session and got back again, 100 miles is average. Some of the courses take place a little bit further away and I have to do a few further miles. Some of them take a little bit closer and I do a few less miles. But if I could get a genuine 150-mile range out of a bike, it would do me as an instructor bike, absolutely no problem at all. When I was a courier in London, I typically did 85 miles a day. So a 100-mile range would actually be enough. Yeah, okay, I might have to sort of trundle home a bit early if I've done a long out-of-town run. But, that they are there for many people. The real issue still remains touring bikes, where it's just impossible to get a big enough battery to do something like, I say, 250-mile range. Now, fast charging is a kickstart in that direction. It means if you could do 125 miles, say, you'd probably be ready for a break anyway. By the time you've sat down, had something to eat for lunch, your bike with a fast charger should be well on the way to being recharged. But charging infrastructure remains a problem. First of all, if you are trying to charge a bike on the street, running a 240-volt cable across the pavement is a non-starter. On the move, the DFT document, if you read it in depth, it claims that nowhere in the UK is more than 25 miles from a fast charger. The problem is that you've got to get there first. And so if you are 25 miles from that fast charger, that's a round trip of 50 miles to get there and back and charge your vehicle. And when you do get there, the problem is, of course, that somebody else is likely to have got there first. Now, I was at Beaconsfield Services at the M40 the other day, waiting to meet my trainee. And they've moved the bike park, and they've also put in a bunch of chargers right next to it. There are 3 for the entire site by the look of it. Naturally, there was in fact a queue to get to those chargers. So move down the road a little bit, there's a Shell petrol station. I was there earlier this year, and they have 2 chargers in there. Both were out of order. So I think there's a real infrastructure issue at the moment, and once there is demand, then certainly petrol stations will start installing them. But right now we still have an issue, I think, with that. So I suspect many of us will be hanging on to our petrol-driven bikes for the foreseeable future. So the question really then is, how long will the fuel industry actually seek to support them? If you are interested in the full-length document, you can find it here. As I say, I have flipped through it. I haven't actually sat down and read the entire thing because there's a lot of it. But if you want to find out a little bit more about what the plans are, that's where to go. Right, okay, Nick said hi from sunny Wiesbaden. Hopefully not too wet out there. I was looking at the rain out there with some horror. I think it was Bad Münstereifel was one of the places that was badly hit by the flooding, and that was it's a lovely little town I was visiting with friends just a couple of years ago. So very sad to see damage out there and all the deaths as well. Right, so on with a bit of news. I'm sure that vehicle training on Shetland sets some special challenges. The weather, for example, is likely to be fairly challenging at times, and obviously long hours of darkness as well. But I'm slightly surprised at the reaction of some driver and vehicle trainers to a decision by the DVSA, the Driving and Vehicle Standards Agency, to shift the large goods vehicle and motorcycle tests to Skatsta Airport. The DVSA do get a lot of bad press, and rightly so at times, but I looked at this one and was a little bit puzzled. Now, the issue appears to be that the airport itself is to the north of the island, and that makes it around 3/4 of an hour's drive from Lerwick, which is the main settlement of 7,000 people. Now, the Module 1 bike test and vocational driving tests were formally held on the Anderson High School car park, which happens to be in Lerwick. But from next month, instructors will have to make the journey all the way north, and that's come under fire from instructors, including Petter Pedersen and Stephen Henry, and they say the new site is unviable, unworkable, and raises serious safety concerns. They say they'd be left with a near 90-minute round trip to the new test site from town, and have questioned the logistics of getting trailers, lorries, buses, and motorbikes up to Skatsta and back again for the tests. Mr. Petterson, who runs Drive Shetland, says, "I won't be doing it anymore. I'm done. I'm finished." And Mr. Henry, who runs Shetland Motorbike Training, said that it'll put him completely out of business. Can you imagine a youngster having to drive all the way up to Skatsta and then having to do their test? It's not going to work. There'll be nobody doing tests. It's as simple as that. And MP Alistair Carmichael also weighed in on with his statement that it was an utterly disgraceful attitude towards the trainers. Now, DVSA, of course, have said that finding a suitable site has been very challenging, and their priority has been to continue to provide a service in the Isle while balancing costs. But I have to say, I have to find Stephen Henry's viewpoint a little surprising. I'm not familiar with Shetland. I've never been there, but I did have a quick look at the Google map, and the A970 and the B9076 that connect the two locations are both wide 2-lane roads, as far as I can see. They look beautifully surfaced, minus the potholes and the usual road repairs that we have to put up with in most of the mainland, and they don't look exactly challenging to ride at the legal limit, at least not in decent weather anyway. Now, I can imagine that in the bad weather, the road would be pretty exposed, but presumably anyone intending to take the bike test on Shetland or to drive a bus on the island would also be liable to be riding on that road or driving on that road, and not just in perfect conditions. So you kind of question the rationale that somebody who, if they pass their test, will be released on the road, can't cope with the conditions on that road. As for the logistical problems, a 90-minute round trip, all I can say is there are some mainland instructors who give their eye teeth to have a Module 1 test centre that far away. If you're training in Barrow in Furness, you have a choice of 2 Module 1 motorcycle test centres. The first is in Carlisle, which is over an hour and a half's ride away, right across the other side of Cumbria, or you can head to Kirkham near Blackpool, which takes you round the south side of Cumbria and down the Lancashire coast, and that's nearer a 2-hour ride. So there are places with bigger problems, I think, than the island of Shetland. Right, okay, so don't forget, you can catch up with this show on Saturdays, Sundays and Wednesdays, 11 o'clock. If you are here live, that's great. If you're not here live, you can always watch it later on Facebook, and of course there's the YouTube channel Survival Skills UK. Don't forget the all-important UK though, or you will find somebody showing you how to sharpen knives with a blunt instrument or something along those lines. Right, so whilst the Japanese manufacturers seem to have stopped launching new motorcycles, there's a complete dearth of new bikes coming out of Japan. The Chinese have been rushing to fill the gap, and Benda is probably another motorcycle brand that you've never heard of. This is their latest machine. Let me just get that up on screen again. Here we go. It's the LFS 700 Tang knife. Now, the styling there is certainly rather futuristic. Some people might say very ugly. I don't think it's the prettiest machine I've ever seen, but it certainly stands out. Those 2 large yellow pods at the rear actually hide twin exhausts, which are fed from the large underbody silencer, which presumably contains the catalyzer as well. 4 swoopy exhaust pipes, which are rather reminiscent of the old 404. Tell you it's a 4-cylinder motor. It's a 680cc liquid-cooled inline 4. It pumps out 93 horsepower, 63 newton meters of torque, which is pretty healthy, and that gives the bike a top speed of around about 130 miles per hour or 210 kph if you prefer. You get a 6-speed gearbox as always and a slipper clutch. The bike's also got a complete set of LED lights and a TFT instrument display, which is now becoming very standard. 17-inch front wheel and 17-inch rear are also pretty industry standard for this kind of machine. The front is hung from a KYB inverted forks rather. There's a offset single adjustable preload rear KYB shock as well. They all bolt to a perimeter frame, which is a mix of aluminium and chrome moly steel. The whole ensemble is a meaty but not unduly heavy 218 kilograms or 480 pounds. Brakes are by Brembo. The ABS is not apparently on that particular publicity photo, but if it's coming to Europe and the company does have an expanding dealer network in Spain and Italy at least, it'll be a must to bring it in with ABS. So it doesn't use low-cost parts. The chains are DID as well, apparently. Yet it could arrive in Europe late on in this year for around £6,000, which is a pretty competitive price if they have got that right. So, okay, on to the final point of the day. Weather. And it's an interesting thing that, of course, here in the UK, we're generally complaining about cold and rain. But yesterday, I noticed one rider on the bike forum, when I looked in, was complaining about it being too hot for riding. So guess what? I was actually out training. Now, yesterday, it was actually 31 Celsius in Northern Ireland, which is the highest temperature ever recorded there. And down here in London, we're due to get up somewhere around about the same today, and it looks like we're going to keep the warm weather, at least in the south of the UK, right through till Thursday, up in the mid to high 20s, and there'll be plenty of strong summer sun beating down. There won't be a lot of clouds around. Now, last time out I talked about the issues of dehydration. I'll just run over the main heads from that particular talk. Like nearly all mammals, we keep cool in hot weather by sweating, and the sweat evaporates, and the evaporation cools the skin, and that cools the blood flowing just below it, and that keeps our body temperature around about 37 Celsius. But as I pointed out, of course, as we sweat fluid away, we get dehydrated unless we start replacing that fluid. And the symptoms of dehydration are thirst, and then followed by dry mouth, headache, fatigue, dizziness, muscle cramps, impaired memory, and concentration. So if we're thirsty, we're actually already dehydrated. Now, riders tend to avoid drinking because it requires loo stops, of course, but don't underestimate how fast dehydration sets in this kind of weather, particularly if you have well-vented riding kit, because that nice cooling breeze is keeping you cool by evaporating the sweat. So once you are dehydrated, your brain stops functioning on top form. And I have to say, it wasn't until I started training that I realized that the headaches I'd been getting sometimes on hotter days were in fact dehydration, at least partly dehydration. So if you're thirsty, you're already dehydrated, so you need to drink really before you get to that stage. And certainly if you get to the loo and your pee is a dark yellow, then you are definitely dehydrated. So drink is the answer. But also on hot days, as well as suffering dehydration, we can end up getting overheated too. Now, skin temperature, as my former instructor buddy Malk reminded me a while back, is around 34 degrees C, so it's a little bit lower than body temperature. Now, what happens when you place a warm object next to a cold object? The answer is pretty obvious. The cooler object warms up. So that's exactly what happens to us. Once the air temperature actually exceeds 34 degrees, not a condition we get regularly in the UK, but you can certainly experience it in many parts of the world, and not too far away from our shores here either, then our bodies start to actively absorb heat from the air. Now, humans can survive, obviously, in temperatures that are well in excess of body temperature, but the reason for that is the sweating and the evaporation that cools the skin. So when it gets really hot, we should strip off, right? Well, no, wrong. Certainly wrong-ish anyway. First of all, if you do that, you're basically exposing your body directly to radiative heating from the sunlight. So just like the tarmac or the top of the bike gets hot because of the sun shining on it, so do our bodies. You just don't feel it quite so dramatically because again, the blood is carrying that temperature away, but it is actually heating your body. Now, lighter colored clothing can not only prevent the sun directly heating your body, but it will bounce back some of the sun's rays. And of course, you don't get sunburnt either. Now, assuming humidity isn't too high and clothing is reasonably loose and breathable, you get a positive effect, because what the clothing does is it actually traps a cooler layer of air between you and the outside world. The evaporative effect is now happening at the layer of the clothing, not the layer of your skin. The sweat is being transported through the your clothing to the outside. When I was riding in a heat wave in Nevada some years ago, the temperature was actually 40 plus. And one of the things I discovered was that if I flipped the visor open for sort of cooler air, it was actually like opening the door of a blast furnace. It was actually hotter. The air was hotter outside than it was actually under my helmet. And the reason for that, I figured out, was the sweat, of course, from my face was actually chilling the air in the air in front of my face. So it wasn't very cool, but it was cooler than the air outside. So very counterintuitive. But sweating, of course, depends on three things. First of all, we have to be able to sweat. We can't be dehydrated. Secondly, the ability of our clothing to carry the air to the outside and to actually cool us down. And thirdly, the humidity. Now, on a day with high humidity, then we can sweat with little effect, even in a breeze. So I've already covered the first issue. But what about the riding kit? Well, my experience is, honestly, that most of the kit in the UK is better at keeping you hot than it is keeping you cool. I've used several suits with breathable linings, which are non-removable. And I have to say, on a really hot day, the amount of moisture that seems to be able to move through those linings seems to be negligible. I get sweaty and hot inside them, unless I sort of unzip various bits of them. Waterproof leathers are even worse as well. I had a sort of made-to-measure Manx leather suit some years ago, and I also had a nigh two-piece leather suit, and both of them got very, very hot on a hot day. So yes, what you need is a well-vented suit, and preferably with a layer which comes out if they're waterproofed. A good way to find out the information about this is to go over to the MotoCap site in Australia and New Zealand and have a look at Chris Hurren's work over there, where they actually study just how effectively the clothing will wick away moisture. So what happens if we can't cool down? As I say, in my experience, that's a bit of a problem with a lot of bike kit. We start to overheat. If our body temperature starts to climb, the effects aren't trivial. Initially, we start sweating more than usual. That's the sign that the body's struggling now to keep cool. Soon after that, you get a headache, and very quickly, I find it difficult to concentrate on what I'm trying to do. So that's not great when riding a bike. Then you get into stages of weakness and exhaustion, mental confusion, cramps, nausea, dizziness, which are all symptoms of heat exhaustion. How likely are we to get compromised on a bike? Well, it's a good question. I don't know of any research, actually. I couldn't find anything. But you'll notice that the symptoms are similar to dehydration. So in my experience, dehydration rarely goes beyond the dry mouth headache stage, because it takes a while. But the effects of heat exhaustion seem to come on much, much more quickly. And you get to the weakness and fatigue stage surprisingly easily. Now, I've certainly got to the headachy stage on a number of occasions when I was couriering in London and got stuck, right in the middle of town, sitting at traffic lights in full sun. That was not pleasant. But I have only reached the dizzy, nauseous stage a couple of occasions, most noticeably in a heat wave in the south of France, when the temperature was actually over 40 Celsius. But it was also very, very high humidity down there because you're near the Mediterranean, and that obviously stops you sweating. And I just happened to be wearing that pair of made-to-measure one-piece leathers with body armor in. So I got very, very uncomfortable very, very quickly. So I got out of the sun, basically parked the bike, sat under a tree with a couple of litres of cold water, soaked my shirt to try and cool down, drank some water, but it really was a couple of hours before I felt better. By that time, temperatures had fallen a little, so I just basically headed off to the mountains. I abandoned the Camargue tour. So anything else we can do? Well, when we had the 100-degree heat wave, the first one down in Kent a few years ago, I was running basic training. So one of the things I did was I started at 6 a.m. train. I was unlocking the lock-up at 5:45. The trainees were arriving at 6. We were on the road by 6:15, and we were doing our slow speed riding exercises as early as possible. And it was still bloody hot, even at 7 a.m. And then we spent the rest of the day down at the coast, where it was a little bit cooler, and riding back as much as possible under trees. And that made it tolerable, if not actually pleasant. In 2018, I did much the same with the advanced courses. We had temperatures topping 30, you probably remember, for several weeks. So I started early and finished early. The other thing you can do, and I'll remind you, is of course you can take a late evening ride out. And that's why one of the reasons I run evening training. So yeah, I'm always a bit surprised that people are reluctant to book up an evening ride when you get some lovely empty roads. Finally, what happens if you ignore the symptoms of heat exhaustion? Well, basically you end up in heat stroke, which is medical attention required, and after that it's coma and death. So it definitely is something to consider. Right, okay, that is the end of today's show. Quite a lot on the electric motorcycles, but also I hope that some interesting information there on how to deal with getting hot on the bike. Nigel has just said, hello, Nigel, you're a bit late. Never mind, you'll catch up, I'm sure. Martin says you get muscle cramps every time that he works outside in South Vietnam, no matter how much he drinks. Right, yes, I'm sure. That must be a very sticky climate there. Right, anyway, that's it for today. I'll be back on Wednesday with the next show. Stay safe out there, stay cool if you possibly can, and hopefully see you on Wednesday at 11. Right, so saying bye for now from Kevin Williams. Catch you again soon. Bye.